Oh, and video.
Between these four.
A second. Oops, okay. Welcome to the March meeting of the Housing and Land Use Committee of Community Board 7. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion to adopt.
Yes. Any objections?
No.
Okay, off we go. So our first item, actually, just before I go there, I just want to mention that we've had some emails sent to us, various members of the board as well as electeds, about the St. Agnes project. We're digging into that and potentially we'll discuss that at next month's meeting once we have a little more information. So, but it sort of follows on some of the concerns that we originally had when we spoke last month. Okay, on to the items.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a presentation about the charter reforms that were adopted by voters in November. The Department of City Planning gave the exact same presentation on Monday and has been offering it to community boards. And since I'm quite knowledgeable about this, we thought we would save the limited staff of the Department of City Planning from presenting, and I will do the presentation. And so I'll go through this slide deck explaining what they are. And if you have questions in the middle, you can interrupt me or we can do questions at the end. I'll try to be somewhat quick just so that we're not here forever. And we'll start on slide 3. And this deck is different from the one that's online, but the content is all the same. I just wanted to use this one because this is the most up-to-date one. So,
Sorry,
yeah,
let me,
take your time.
it doesn't
Okay.
like full screen mode.
Um,
Can I just also mention one other thing? So this sort of flows right into number 3, which is the affordable housing fast track methodology rules. We have to give our comments by April 1st. So that means that we should be looking, if we have comments, to be drafting a resolution after Adam's presentation, discussion, and then resolution.
Yeah, and I can also explain some of the methodology if that's
Yes.
helpful too. Okay, so there were 6 questions on your ballot last year. The first question was a state constitutional amendment about cross-country skiing in the Adirondacks. Then there are these 4 questions that all passed, and then the 6th question was about even year elections in New York City, but we're just going to talk about the first, these 4, 2, 3, and 4, which are the ones that passed and are related to land use and planning in New York City. If we go to the next slide. So charter process, how does it work? The city council or the mayor can create a charter revision commission. It is a set of New Yorkers who have to study the entire charter, but are often tasked with studying a specific area. And one of the specific areas that this charter revision commission was tasked with studying was the affordability and housing crisis in New York City. So over the course of 7 months, there were 10 hearings in all 5 boroughs. There were, I think, over 4,000 written comments that were submitted, and then multiple meetings of the Charter Revision Commission to discuss these items. And there were essentially 3 main findings of the commission. One was we're not building enough housing, and we're especially not building enough affordable housing. 2, housing production is very uneven across neighborhoods. So I think last year, the 10 or 11 community districts built as much housing as the other 40 or whatever it is, 40 something some odd community districts. So it's just really disparate. Parts of the city build a ton, other parts don't build anything. And then the third was that publicly financed projects and small projects face the biggest challenges. So when the city is actually trying to build affordable housing, that causes problems. And when people are trying to make smaller changes, not go from, you know, a 2-story building to a 20-story building, but go from a 2-story building to a 5-story building, that those projects are very difficult too. And they worked those were kind of like the guiding principles. So if we go to the next slide, this is kind of the response, right? The commission wanted to create a faster, simpler, and less political process to allow modest increases in housing capacity. So those are kind of those smaller changes that we talked about, more affordable housing across more neighborhoods, And then also resiliency infrastructure, clean energy, and open space. These are some other things that the commission heard that were kind of challenging to do. And when we get to that section, we can talk about that a little more. ULURP remains in place for most actions in most places. New York City is blessed to have had almost now 50 years of ULURP. It is a time-limited process that is, you know exactly how it's going to work and how it's going to happen. And that really benefits New York City. There are other cities like Chicago where anytime you try to do anything, it can essentially get pocket vetoed, or San Francisco where anytime you want to do anything at all, you need to go through a process. So ULURP is really one of the things that makes New York City work. But it's important. The commission was saying we only want to change those sections where ULURP isn't working. Everything still goes through public review. Community board review remains 60 days, and all sorts of other things outside the charter: environmental review, historic districts, landmark protections, labor protections, construction standards, safety standards. All of that is unchanged by the proposals that we're going to walk through. All right, so we'll move to the next slide. So this is question 2, and this is really focused on making sure that we build more affordable housing, right? So we don't have enough affordable housing. I think everyone agrees. Some parts of the city build a lot, other parts don't build anything. And then again, getting to this point of like the complication of the government trying to build affordable housing, that process requirements that private construction doesn't have, how can we try to solve some of those issues? So this question had 2 different elements. So it changed the charter for 2 different things, and we're going to talk about them one after the other. And these are the 2 things that have a rulemaking that we'll talk about after in agenda item 3. So we'll start with the BSA fast track. So the BSA is the Bureau of Standards and Appeals. It has existed for basically as long as New York City has zoning. And this is a new process just for essentially government-sponsored affordable housing. Today, the government can already use a BSA process to build affordable housing, but it's quite limited. It basically only applies if you're in a manufacturing district and you want to switch to residential and you're building affordable housing. It's very complicated. You have to prove that, you know, a 55-unit building isn't feasible, but a 56-unit building is feasible. And this is a much more simplified process. And what it does is it says, all right, similar to kind of ULURP, 60-day review at the community board, 30-day BSA review. And what is the BSA looking for? They're looking that the project is brought by an HDFC, so a housing development fund company, which is essentially how it's a state regulated entity. It's how basically all affordable housing in New York City gets built. It has to be in a district that already allows residential. So if it's manufacturing and you want to convert to residential, you can't do this. It has to meet a neighborhood character finding, which is a kind of standard BSA thing, which says, does this fit within kind of the context of the neighborhood? And it needs to be consistent with HPD design and development standards, which HPD is the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. They fund a lot of affordable housing in New York City, and they essentially have to have what's called a soft commitment letter, but a letter to say, like, this is a project that HPD supports and is going to fund. And what this does is it takes a really long, complicated process, ULURP, and it makes it much shorter. And I'll give an example of why that matters. There was someone who wanted to build affordable housing in, I believe, Queens. And this was like one of the parts of the, someone gave this as public testimony. And afterwards, the commissioners were all like, okay, this is obviously a problem. So they wanted to build an 100% affordable development. They needed a zoning change in order to do it. New York state law requires that you have a well-considered plan. So you can't do what's called a spot rezoning. So they rezone not only the development site for this affordable house, this affordable building, but also a number of other parking lots in the neighborhood to kind of say, like, this is how this entire area needs to be rezoned. And that required them to do a full environmental impact statement, which added, I don't know, a year and a half to the process and probably cost $700,000 to $1 million. And then when it made it to the city council said, well, we want the affordable housing project, but we don't want to rezone any of the other sites, right? So this project was delayed by a year and a half, had to do spend all this money on an environmental impact statement, and then in the end, it didn't get anywhere. This BSA fast track would basically allow you to say, I want to build 100% affordable housing on this site, and the BSA could say, yes, you're allowed to do that. And what's really powerful about this is that it's just for that project. So if for some reason, let's say it was going to allow a 50-unit apartment building, if the financing fell through, if something happened, you can't build a 50-unit market rate building anymore. It was only for that specific project. So it doesn't actually change the zoning, it just allows that project. So this creates a much, much faster process for the kind of 100% affordable housing that New Yorkers are really looking for.
And it's only for 100% affordable. It's not
It's-
inclusionary housing.
It's not related to that. It's basically based on the state definition of a housing development fund corporation or a company. So it doesn't have like a strict affordability limit, but HPD basically only does 100% affordable. If HPD decided they wanted to do an 80% affordable, I guess they could. In general, the only non-affordable part of an HPD project is a supers unit. So normally it's like 99.95% affordable or something.
Can you
Yeah.
give a sense of how many units get developed each year under this program?
Well, 0 right now, because this program's brand new.
This is the change.
This is the change.
Right, under
Yeah.
the fast track, but under the HDFCs, how much, not on this time frame, but how many units?
I
get
don't
developed by
know,
these
I
kinds
don't
of
know what
organizations?
HPD's production per year would be of like new construction, but a lot of it is by right. So a lot of what HPD is funding is a development that doesn't need to change the zoning. This would only apply for projects where the zoning doesn't allow the project that they want to bring, so that they would go through this process instead of bringing a zoning change. So I don't know.
Have
um,
there been any in CB7?
Has HPD done any?
There are a bunch of
Have there been
HDFCs.
things that had to go through BSA
Oh,
review
yeah.
in order to?
No, because this is a new,
Previously,
well,
in the old.
the BSA exists for like a lot of other reasons, but
Right.
for affordable housing, no, nothing in CB7 has gone through this because the only prior BSA action related to affordable housing was in manufacturing districts, and we don't have any on the Upper West Side.
So the situation from Queens did not happen?
No, that the Queens in our community, no. But a good example would be the development on 108th Street, the Wish Fish that went through a ULURP action. Potentially in the future, they could go through this process instead, which would be faster and rather than going through a
This is
full
what we
ULURP.
used to call variance.
It is essentially granting I don't believe the technical term here is a variance. I think it's a waiver or something, but yes,
Yeah.
the BSA could say like, you don't have to comply with zoning if you're building.
The purpose
Yeah.
of this amendment is to cover a situation where an affordable housing developer wants to do something and he needs zoning to be waived.
Exactly, yeah. And it's,
As
yeah,
opposed to a rezon.
as opposed to rezoning it. And the reason is because the rezoning triggers all of these complicated
Sure.
things, like that example in Queens where you had to include all these other sites. And then at the end of the day, the city council is like, well, we don't want to include those other sites. So this is just like a much faster way to build the affordable housing that people are looking for.
And does the city council have any say here?
No, because it's just the BSA and the BSA
The
is
important.
appointed, yeah, it's 5, like,
And
people who
community.
the community board, yes, but we can't reject something, right? So the BSA does it. The BSA is appointed experts essentially and are very familiar with like handling this sort of thing. Yeah.
Adam, the zoning that can be waived under this is not use because it has to be residential to start with, right? So is the zoning just bulk
It's,
or
it's-
size?
it's
What can get waived?
both. I guess height and parking. Those
Okay.
are the 3 elements.
Adam,
Yeah.
could the Bloomingdale Library project fall under this?
If the Bloomingdale Library project was done as an HDFC, yes, but what I believe EDC is not planning for it to be an HDFC because I don't think the Bloomingdale Library project has enough affordable
And
apartments
it's
in it.
on the
To that market,
EDC, not
right.
HPD.
Yeah, but if it's
Yeah.
an HDFC, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it's just
HDFC.
HPD would have to support it, but it would need to be a majority, like a higher level of affordability.
Is there a line for how much affordability?
I'm not
Also,
sure
it's a
exactly
different
what
set
it
of
is.
rules
Yeah.
applies to city land than we're discussing here.
The economics such that there's never going to be 100% city-funded affordable housing project, in community book seven.
I mean, I don't want, like, just to take this St. Agnes thing, obviously that's an existing building, but that would be an example of HPD and DSS fully supporting a building. And the Upper West Side has HPD funded buildings. We have not had an HPD funded new construction project in a while. But I know you could imagine it. This also would allow, potentially like a lot of, like Mitchell Lamas that are in HDFC, for example, or other HDFCs that we have, if they have like a parking lot that they wanted to develop affordable housing on, like they could do it. So there are ways, but yeah.
And how does this new model accommodate or not ground floor commercial?
I think the BSA is because of the way that you're like waiving things, if a project was put forward with ground floor commercial, this could be approved by the BSA. Okay, we'll go on to the other part, which is the affordable housing fast track in the community districts that produce the least affordable housing. And this is the other rulemaking that will be discussed today. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is again targeting that issue of some districts build a lot of affordable housing, other districts build no affordable housing. So what happens is that in October 2026, and this is going to repeat every 5 years, but we'll talk about it just for kind of the next 5 years because that makes it easiest. In October 2026, the Department of City Planning and the Department of Housing Preservation and Development will announce what are the 12 community districts that built the least affordable housing or had the lowest growth in affordable housing over the past 5 years. So the formula is how many affordable housing units did you build in the last 5 years divided by how many apartments or dwelling units do you have in the district. And then so that's in fall of this year, they'll announce what those 12 community districts are. And then in January of 2027, this process will go into effect and we'll talk about what that process is. And that will run for 5 years. And then we'll recalculate it 5 years later. So 2026 is the first. We'll do it again in 2031, 2036, et cetera. And this aligns with the city council, which put together something called the Fair Housing Framework that has also a 5-year cycle to study how and where to build affordable housing.
So it's not based on how many units were built in the area. So if you have an area that has a lot of housing stock, but no buildings were built, you're gonna be in that category, even though, maybe there was one building built and was 100% affordable, you would still be in that category because you're in a well-built area that hadn't built much new housing.
It's based on how much affordable housing you build compared to the number of apartments you are. And the reason that's necessary is because unlike city council districts, where every city council district has the same number of people, community districts are completely different. There's some community districts that have 50,000 units and other community districts that have 200,000 units. So if you did it just based on who built the most affordable housing, that wouldn't be fair because some community districts are so much bigger than other ones. So in this way, you take a ratio to say like, how much growth did you have in affordable housing?
So CB7 is short to make, unfortunately, the short list, right? How could?
I think it's quite likely that CB7 would end up
Well,
in.
then
Or like
if we had
totally
more
in that short
affordable
list
housing
forever.
than other people,
If we built more
No.
affordable housing.
have more
It has
affordable
nothing to
housing.
do with who.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
it's just
say.
about over the last 5 years, how much more affordable housing did you build? Yeah. Because the idea of this is to make sure that affordable housing is being built in the parts of the city where it has not been built.
But that's not what this does.
Yeah, right, correct.
This, I'm sorry, I'm not following that.
I mean, what they're
Yeah.
trying to key in on is it doesn't talk about like, it's not number of affordable units in the last 5 years over total new housing construction in the last 5 years. Well, that's Minna's point, which would say basically like, if you're not building anything, then maybe you shouldn't belong on the list because you're not building market rate or affordable. And then the other people are saying, oh, this doesn't count that maybe some community districts have a huge, long history, they're just not building it now.
Yeah, that's
I mean, I
fair.
see all
Yeah.
of these different points, but that's the issue
I
that you
mean,
guys
we
are saying.
could have, and we don't, but we could have, you know, 1 million units of affordable housing that didn't happen to build any. And another neighborhood could have 10 units of affordable housing, and we would be on the list and they wouldn't because they built.
In the last
Recently.
5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think the controlling thing to think about that is that and we'll get to this on the next slide of like what exactly this means. All this means is that people can bring these projects. And so if you're in a neighborhood, which I think what you're insinuating is that the Upper West Side doesn't have anywhere left
No,
to
I'm
build.
insinuating that they're
Yeah.
targeting certain neighborhoods that are highly developed for this process as opposed to areas that are more likely to have.
I
affordable
think you're
housing.
also gonna end up with a lot of districts in Queens that are very low density. So I think it's mixed and
Can I ask,
yeah.
why not apply this fast track to all affordable housing in the city? Why, you know,
I mean, that could have been an option to say, that all affordable housing should
That
have
was one
this.
of our comments in the charter review
To say
process.
rather than just 12 community districts, to say all community districts.
Or that
Well, I
if it's
mean,
above a
I'll
certain
tell you why it
percentage of
happened.
affordable.
The argument, they're like, I know, Antonio Reynoso, who's the Brooklyn Borough President, said that if you look at where all the new affordable housing was built under Bloomberg, like since Bloomberg, a lot of it was in, outer borough, Brooklyn and Queens, certain neighborhoods. And very little of it was in the so-called rich areas. And he thinks that there needs to be equity where if you're building new affordable, it has to be spread out around different neighborhoods. Okay, so how do you do that? You have to have some kind of rational, objective process, and this is the process that was agreed upon, you know, in the drafting of City of Yes. And during that process was, let's look at who is not building recently, right? Because you can't, the neighborhoods change so much that you can't look back, the argument, you can't look back 20 years and say, well, we built a lot of affordable housing in, you know, the 1990s. Because prices have changed a lot, like Western Brooklyn's changed a lot, so on and so forth.
this is a very good proposal, fast track, but it excludes more than 3/4 of the.
Yeah, I think what it's trying, what I mean,
I
and
get-
this, I will also say, this is not a proposal, right? This is
Right,
what
this is
this
not-
is the law. I would say two things. One, like, I think will be on this list. I also think Staten Island will be on this list, right? For the same reason. The difference between us and Staten Island is on Staten Island, there are a lot of places where you could build housing.
Places to build.
On the Upper West Side, there aren't that many, but for the sites where there are, this is going to encourage people to make sure that the projects they're building are affordable housing. Yeah,
So Adam,
yeah.
assuming our district or whichever district ends
Yeah.
up in this short list, I don't think you've yet told us what happens next.
I'm
We're getting there.
I'm working on that. Yeah,
Actually, this
Yeah.
will apply to one of our later agenda items.
potentially it could. Yeah, sure.
By some wild fluke, this might apply.
Yes, this could apply.
And it
But
may be the
again,
only time it ever applies in CB7.
I doubt that. I think there are other sites. I would, however, say that because this is still a process where the zoning is changing, you still need to, it's not an as of right project, right? You're changing the zoning. So one, you can't bring this action until January 1st, 2027. And two, you still need to do an environmental review if you're changing it. So I think potentially for this project you're discussing, they may choose to move forward rather than go through the environmental review process. Okay, but to answer your question about what this is, you need to be a mandatory inclusionary housing project, that's MIH. You need to meet those standards or do better. And this can include not just an individual project, but it can include a neighborhood rezoning or anything else. So something that I think is very interesting on the Upper East Side, for example, is they have some manufacturing areas and they have been saying, we want this to be residential. We think it should be residential with MIH. CB8, which I think has some of the same dynamics of CB7 and is also likely to end up in the bottom 12, could use the affordable housing fast track for a community board led action to rezone those commercial areas into residential areas.
Manufacturing.
You said
Yeah.
manufacturing first and then you said commercial.
Sorry, it's manufacturing and turn it into residential. Yes. Okay, and what will that process look like if we go to the next slide? So in the vast majority of community districts, 47 of the 59, it's just ULURP as normal. For the 12 community districts that produce the least affordable housing, it will be a 60-day community board and borough president review, followed by a 30-day city planning commission review. If it's an EIS project, the city planning commission gets 45 days just so that they can turn the draft EIS into a final EIS. But as you can see, this vastly shortens the amount of time that it takes. And as was noted, the city council no longer plays a role, so it brings some certainty to projects where perhaps
And
the
and neither does the mayor.
and the mayor also does not play a role. Yeah,
And the pre-certification process?
the pre-certification process is not in the charter, so that's
That
not
remains
touched.
unchanged.
Yeah, that remains unchanged, and I think that what I had heard is that the folks are looking, this administration is looking at how can we make the pre-cert process faster. I can say that when commissioners ask this question about like, what can we do about pre-cert? All of the research that we did suggested that if you put a timeline on pre-certification, so this is the period before ULURP starts, it just creates a pre-certification. So other municipalities that have tried to do what's called like a shot clock to be like, you have to get back within this amount of time. Like there has to be a way for the agency to manage things. So it tends to just create another layer of process, and that you're better off just trying to streamline things
Mhm.
rather than trying to say you only have this many days. Okay, any other questions about this one?
One other question. I saw that Hochul is trying to propose some changes to the secret process. Does that affect some of the?
This doesn't affect any of that because environmental review is
So-
state law and then there's a city version of it. None of that's in the charter.
Okay.
So that would play a role in pre-certification, but whether or not, yeah,
But not to this.
yeah, wouldn't change this. Other than in this one, whether they're, sorry, we'll go to 3. In what we're about to describe, if something requires an environmental impact statement, you can't do it. If they changed what required an environmental impact statement, obviously that would change, but not super relevant. Okay, so third question is called ELURP, right? We have ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. ELURP is the Expedited Land Use Review Procedure. And this is really targeting the issue of ULURP being one size fits all. And I think a great example of this is if you look at the last 10 years of ULURP actions, there wasn't a single action where someone was asking just to increase by 30%, right? Go from a 5-story building to a 6 or 7-story building. Instead, it was all big jumps. Someone saying, instead of building a 5-story building, I want to build a 10-story building. And if those kind of like small changes, which I think are what most communities want, just don't work under ULURP, and we know they don't work because no one's bringing them, the idea of this is to bring a new process for those smaller changes to make it easier. So this is a shorter, simpler process for the smaller changes that don't get proposed today. And as I was saying, if something is a project that requires an environmental impact statement, meaning that it has the potential to cause significant adverse impacts on the environment and communities, then you can't use ELURP, right? ELURP is for modest things. If something requires an EIS, it can't possibly be modest, therefore it still needs to go through ELURP.
So this is not about affordable housing. This is just about
Best.
This is
increasing.
about
Right.
this is about small changes. And I'll answer this question about affordable housing because I think it's a really good one in a second. Let's just go through one more slide. This is the process. So very similar to the affordable housing fast track that we just discussed, same 60-day community board and borough board, and then the city planning commission. Okay, let's go to the next slide, because I think this is the easiest way to explain.
Except that in
Yeah.
this, and this was a criticism I.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
The community board and borough presidents that are simultaneous as opposed to sequential. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the change. And that's, yeah. Okay, so what can you actually do for housing? In the blue areas of this map, which are zoned R1 through R5, which are low density districts, and that means the standard height is 45 feet and the floor area ratio is 2.0 or less, you can change between them. So if you're R1, you can go to R5. If you're R4, you can go to R5. And this basically allows you to, in all these low density neighborhoods, build up to 45 feet high, which is kind of like the max, right? You have your like 3-story Victorian with the peaked roof, you're at like 45 feet. You have like a small 4-unit building, also might be 45 feet. If you're near a train station or on a commercial corridor because of City of Yes, like you can go slightly higher, but basically you can't go higher than 4 or 5 stories. And in the blue, that's now possible. In the orange areas, which is where we are, medium and high density districts, you can rezone up to a 30% increase in your maximum residential FAR. And that is the part where you essentially will have the affordability requirements come in. Because if you are switching in the R6 and above districts, it essentially allows you to jump up the zoning ladder. So to go from like an R7 to an R8 or R8 to R9. And the way that MIH is done right now, that's a big enough change that it would trigger mandatory inclusionary housing. So there are things you could do where it wouldn't, like you could go from, I guess, like R6, there's like certain parts of R6 to R7, which is, you know, like a 10 or 15% increase in FAR, but like probably no one's ever going to do that. We're really talking about people trying to go from like R7 to R8. And when that happens, it would trigger mandatory inclusionary housing. So is there a strict affordability requirement in this? No, but most of the changes that would make sense would trigger MI.
And is it the case that if you, let's say you didn't want to do the ELRP, you could avoid MIH, but still upzone, or any upzoning will?
Well, the
require
MIH is always like, it is the policy of the Department of City Planning to map MIH when the density increase is high enough. So there's no way you can get out of MIH unless the city, I guess, decides to get rid of MIH, like, but I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, other things you can do. HPD disposition. So if the city owns a site that they're giving to a developer to develop affordable housing, or if the city is acquiring a site for affordable housing. And the very confusing thing is oftentimes these things happen at the same time. So the city might have put like a covenant on a piece of property and only the city can take that like deed restriction off. So they might acquire the property at the same time that they like remove that and then dispose it. So it might all be one action. And this has actually already happened. The first ELRP has already been filed and is to transfer a property to a affordable housing developer to build affordable housing in the Bronx. So it's pretty exciting that this change is already being used. One quick flag about this is that state law requires that dispositions go to the city council. So in that chart where we saw like 60 days for the here, as you can see in the small text, the city council rather than the city planning commission will have the 30 days when law requires council review or approval. So if state law says for like a disposition, it needs to be the city council, not the city planning commission, then they just swap, but it's the same 30-day period.
The city planning
Yeah.
commission would have no role in that?
The city planning commission would have no role in like, but that kind of makes sense because we're talking about like building affordable housing, giving it away. Like it's not really like or selling it. It's not really like a planning thing. So it kind of makes sense that the city council is the one to make that decision. Other things that it includes are city map changes for affordable housing. So that would be, let's say there is a site where at one time there was a street that ran through a like super block development. Oftentimes when these super blocks were being done in the 40s and 50s, people were not very rigorous about actually demapping a street. However, today, if you wanted to, for example, replace a parking lot with another affordable building, but there's a street there, you can't build on the street, so you need to demap that street. This will make it much easier to demap that street. And again, when I say demap, basically what I'm saying is there are streets that exist on the map of all streets. They don't actually exist as streets, like they're just on the map. Then also, if you need a street, if you do need a street, state law requires that you can't build a building unless it's on a street. So if you need to add a new street to meet a street access requirement, you can also go through this process. And then the last one is these things called Sail Away, which is an existing program that already exists. SAIL stands for slivers, access ways, and interior lots. And it basically, the city owns all sorts of random little bits and bobs of land. You know, some of them might be like 6 inches wide by 10 feet. Obviously, since the city owns them, we don't get property tax revenue from them. So the Sail Away program already allows certain things to be sold, but the idea is to like sell this 6 inches by 10 feet to the neighboring landowner instead of the city owning these random bits and bobs left over from projects. So all of these projects can go through
If a
Peeler.
developer, let's say in our area, in R10 or R9, wants to increase his zoning by 30%.
Yeah.
He's got to go through this. What are the criteria for approval or disapproval of the increase, or is it automatic?
It's not automatic. It's the same as it is now with the city planning commission saying like, is this good planning
Are
for
there specific
the city?
criteria? I've forgotten.
No, I don't think there's anything written about like what the city planning commission is looking. They're trying to like plan a good city essentially.
Well, there are a lot of sections in the ZR that have criteria for
Right.
various different
I know,
actions.
yeah.
But you're saying in this case, there is no.
It's too new.
criteria.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, there will be a rulemaking that's in process on what is eligible, and maybe that'll go into some detail. But at this stage, when this was added to the charter, it didn't say anything about like when to approve or when not to
I
approve.
can't define good zoning, but I
Yeah.
know when I see.
But a
it.
lot of this could appear as a text amendment. from
It
city
could,
planning.
or a rule. I will say that the fast track in the bottom 12 community districts, that did require certain things. So they do need to say that like there's sufficient sewer capacity, for example, they do need to make that finding. But here, at this stage, there are no findings that they need to make.
Is there a list?
I'm sorry,
Is there a list of those criteria?
for the first one.
Yeah.
I could look it up. It's in the charter. I can't remember. I think it's that like they have to assess it based on the city council's fair housing framework and that it has like sufficient infrastructure to support the development. I think those were the two requirements.
But physical infrastructure, not like school infrastructure or transportation.
I would have to
or
check to see exactly
open
which
space
it
or
was.
things
That
like
Yeah.
stuff shows up frequently in EIS.
Yes.
Yeah,
Wistfish has 2 buildings coming online. There's gonna be groundbreaking at the end of this month on 108th Street at the end. And then further into the year, 85th Street, the Free Art, now called the Free Arts Club. Is that included in any of these considerations?
well, none of those have zoning changes, right?
The ULURP
Not-
was
not
done
on
already
those,
for
no.
108.
Yeah,
Right.
none have zone, and there's no changing of ownership, so I don't think so. I'm trying to pull up the exact one for,
So you're covering us. You're covering us for that 5 years.
That's the problem.
okay, it says that to answer your question. In determining whether the city planning commission should approve with modifications, or disapprove an application, the city planning commission shall assess and make a finding regarding the consistency of such application with the fair housing plan submitted. That's the city council's fair housing framework and plan. And and the adequacy of existing transportation, sewer, and other infrastructure.
Okay.
So that's the finding. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. The other things that ELERP can do, it can do voluntary flood buyouts for 1 to 4 families in areas that the city council defines. So if you think about Hurricane Sandy, right? There are parts of Staten Island that we know are gonna flood again. If there is someone who owns the house and would love the government to buy their house and turn it into a, estuary or swamp to soak up stormwater, that requires them going through ELERP, which is very complicated. So this would allow the city council to say, hey, anyone who wants to sell us your house in this area, you can sell it. It's gonna go through ELERP. It's gonna take 90 days instead of 7 months. Again, only voluntary, so you have to agree to it. If the city owns property and wants to get new property, like wetlands or other developable lands for resiliency streets, they can use ELERP. That's also already happening. So there's an ELERP project in Staten Island where the city is buying up some land to expand part of the green belt that helps deal with flooding and things by creating land for the water to go, so the land can suck up water. Undeveloped land in paper streets or underwater. Underwater is like a shockingly large issue in parts of the area where the coastline has been changing. So those kind of like resiliency, clean energy, open space projects can go through ELERP.
What's a paper street? A street on paper, but not actually
Yeah,
in
exactly.
existence?
Yep.
Okay.
It also has a second definition, I believe, of like when map makers were making atlases, they would put fake streets in so that they could see who had copied their atlas, because they would copy the fake streets, not knowing
Wow.
that it was a real street. But in this case, we're talking about streets that are like on the map, but don't actually exist,
But legally streets.
but legally a street.
Right.
In this district, we had an Indian trail,
Yes,
and they were going to block, you remember?
Yeah.
Block the development, build a little build-up facility, and it ends up that we just proved that other buildings on Riverside and so on were ready on the trail, so a long time ago, the trail
Was
no
gone.
longer existed, but these
Okay.
things come up.
so, but not commercial pump.
In terms of like the buyouts,
Voluntary.
I think the buyouts are only residential. I could be wrong, but I
Because
think it's.
I know of building on the waterfront that flooded badly during Sandy and it was commercial. I was wondering.
Yeah, I think right now the focus is just on that. And then the other ones on that slide, sorry, just to be quick.
Sorry.
This is my favorite, since we've been spending all this time talking about the city map. It also says what the grade of a street is. So what is the height of the street above sea level? Obviously, every borough, and we'll get to this, has a different definition of like what the grade is. But this is important because at one time, the sewers were also on this map, and the sewers obviously have to, high to low matters. But streets, less so. But if you are doing a bunch of state of good repair work, right? Let's say we're somewhere on Staten Island and there's a road that floods all the time, and we want to repave the street and we want to raise it so that it doesn't flood all the time, that would require going through ELERP to change the city map. Now you can go through ELERP much easier, and that'll make it possible that when DOT is doing these projects, they can be like, okay, as part of this project, we're also going to raise this street. So this should help solve some of those issues. And then the last one is about disposition for solar power leases. So this isn't like selling land, but it's giving permission to lease the land. And that just makes it much easier. Like if a solar company is going to put all these solar panels in, they want some certainty, but they can't always get that certainty without going through ELERP. And then the last is site selection. So if you're doing these below 5,000 square foot projects for resiliency, open space, or solar power, you can go through ELERP rather than ULERP. So that's like picking where you want to, put like a system that like pumps out stormwater or something. Yeah.
What does the BFE stand for?
Base flood elevation. So it's saying you can go up to
Gotcha.
2.5 feet above whatever the
It's
flood
a
elevation
technical
is.
definition
Okay.
set by the city.
Yeah,
And that varies in by flood zone and stuff, I imagine.
yeah.
It's above the flood.
Yeah.
Is any of our area in the flood zone?
I
There's a
assume,
tiny sliver along Riverside, like along the Hudson River,
Yeah.
actually.
Nothing
outside
of park, right?
I think
Part of Riverside
potentially
South.
all the way at like 60th Street,
Yeah.
maybe,
It
but
runs
yeah.
along like the
yeah,
coast, but it's a tiny
no
sliver.
buildings,
I don't think so.
Yeah,
it's-
no buildings out.
Yeah.
We're much higher.
We're
Yeah,
buildings,
we're up
yeah.
high. We're gonna
In-
survive.
In Sandy, a whole bunch of Riverside Park
Yeah,
along the river flooded, not residential buildings, but the lowest level of Riverside
Yeah.
Park up in the nineties,
Mhm.
hundreds and stuff.
Yeah.
flooded.
This doesn't seem like, I mean, there are many areas of the city where there are residential
yeah,
buildings.
this
that are
is,
in
this is
flood zones.
really Staten Island and the Rockaways.
Yeah.
Okay, since it's already 7:20, I'll try to be faster. Okay, Affordable Housing Appeals Board, this is,
I just want to check.
trying to deal with that. There was kind of a consistent trend that citywide and borough-wide views were always being co-opted by just the community, right? And we're a whole city, lots of these dynamics are citywide, and it felt that there was more weight needed for those borough and neighborhood-wide perspectives. And one of the like strongest indicators of that is there are parts of the city where no one has proposed to build affordable housing in like multiple generations. So that clearly is not working. So the idea here is that now, instead of the mayoral veto, you'll have an appeals board, and the appeals board consists of 3 citywide elected, or not citywide, but the mayor citywide, the city council speaker who represents citywide interests, and then the borough president who represents the borough interest. And this only applies to projects within a single borough. And the idea is that you can, if we go to the next slide, thanks. The goal is to strike a better balance between local views, borough views, and citywide views. So what projects are eligible for the Affordable Housing Appeals Board? ULURPs, text amendments, they have to facilitate at minimum MIH, mandatory inclusionary housing levels of affordability, and they have to be within a single borough. And how it works is if 2 of the 3 members agree, the appeals board can override a city council disapproval, or they can reject individual changes to an application that the city council made. ULURP otherwise doesn't change. ELURP and fast track proposals are not subject to the appeals board. So if we go to the next slide on kind of our same thing, you have, this can't last more than 20 days. There's 5 days for someone to call an application, either the applicant themselves or one of the 3 members of the appeals board, and then they have 15 days to make a decision. So it's slightly longer than the existing system, but it kind of rebalances things. And this one is kind of my favorite because we've actually already seen this play a role. Some of you might be familiar with Vicky Palladino, who is a council member in Queens. She just voted in favor of a project that includes affordable housing in her district. And she said the reason that she was voting in favor of it is because if she voted against it, the Donovan Richards and the mayor and potentially the speaker were all in support of the project, and she was going to be overruled. So ELURP, there's already been 2 projects filed, and this one, we've already seen it at work,
So
which is
it puts the
exciting.
city council person in check.
It puts this, historically, the way the city council operated is that they would defer to
The
the
Local
person,
council.
exactly, and this is kind of like a balancing act on it. And it will continue to be interesting to see how that plays out. Maybe it plays out, there's a very real possibility that this body is never constituted and never serves because, like in the example I just described, the council members are like, I don't want to get overruled. I'm just gonna vote in favor of it.
Am I-
So we'll see what happens.
The member deference is purely like informal custom, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that
No.
requires that.
There's nothing that
Yes,
requires it, and
About
if,
95% of the cases, that's. Yeah.
I think it's
But like,
higher.
a majority could do whatever they wanted to.
Yeah, yeah,
If they wanted to change. it.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's a
it's
norm.
just, it happens very
It's
infrequently.
it's a fundamental equilibrium that, whenever, whenever you have a ward-based system.
Yeah,
It's what happens in Baltimore, happens in Chicago, they have different names, but it's just like like, if you look at the game theory of how these things work, it always is the case.
Yeah,
that
I get it,
You
I
get
get it.
member deficit.
I was a lawyer for the city of Seattle when they moved from at-large to districts, and
Yeah.
that tradition did not
Yeah.
carry over.
Yeah.
Because it was a new culture, so, you know, every city is a little different in its own way.
Okay, great. And we'll do the last one. This was everyone's favorite. And I can say that with certainty because 75%, I believe, of voters voted in favor of this. So that 74%. So that means that it was people's favorite.
The archivists who like the paper maps for the ones who.
Yeah, so today there are 8,000 different paper maps, maybe more, we don't know. And the city consolidated in 1898, but we never consolidated the maps. And actually in 1962, I guess, when the borough presidents lost a bunch of their power around street pavings and things, they essentially, at that time, it didn't make any sense to centralize the maps because they were maps. But in 2025, it made a lot of sense to create a single digital thing. So what this means is that by January 1st, 2027, so in 9 months, address assignment will be centralized. So what that means is the address for a building, which is super necessary to make sure that FDNY can get somewhere. That will be centralized. When our council member Gail Brewer was borough president, she used to be in charge of assigning the addresses and was very good at it, at making sure that there were not dumb addresses that would confuse people. Not all boroughs, I think, did as good a job as she did. Then in 2028, the borough maps will be consolidated. So those are the physical maps. And then in 2029, they will be digitized. And then once it's digitized, there will be a ULURP-like process to adopt it as the map. And once it's adopted, then it will be legally binding. And it will mean that if you want to check something, you can use this digital map instead of having to go to the borough president's office on the day when the topography bureau is open. And so it should smooth things out a lot. Any questions about the map? Yeah.
Will this purely incorporate existing maps, or will it, for instance, this kind of dumb, get rid of streets that don't exist, will it make any changes, or is it just consolidating?
It should just be like rationalizing what there is. There will have to be some decisions when there are like disputes, if that makes sense. And that's why it will go through a big public review process before it's adopted.
Yeah, when you're talking about the DMAP streets, by the way, a lot of DMAP streets actually have multiple easements in them as well, which is a miserable thing. And then also when they created these super blocks, some of these super blocks look rectangular when you're looking at them, but then you find out they're like 1-inch quirks, which throw everything off. And this is why this looks like something out of, if you actually go to a Taco office, it looks like Dickens is in the back. Some Dickens people are still there.
Yeah, and actually, we are very lucky. Manhattan, there's an incredible online map that you can look at and you can click through it, and it's very well documented. So I would say, like, if you gave me truth serum, I'd be like, did this one matter to Manhattan? No, but some of the other boroughs have not been as good, and it will be like a very big improvement for them. Okay, so we'll go to this is just, again, this is DCP's slides, but I think this is helpful. So we're about to talk about this first bullet, which is the BSA fast track and the affordable housing fast track. These are the rulemaking process. We'll talk about them, but on the 25th and the April 1st is when the public hearing is. Then there will be a ELURP rulemaking to define eligibility and an affordable housing appeals board to define the process and the eligibility. We already have the first 2 ELURPs that have already been filed. And then again, DCP said stuff, but I'm not DCP. So any other questions about them? Otherwise, I will turn it back over to Seema and we can talk about the rulemaking.
Thanks a lot, very helpful.
That was
Thank you.
fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Yes. Okay. So questions, comments about the rulemaking?
You got Gail apparently.
Oh,
She wants to.
you're right. Gail, would you like to speak?
No, I think that the person who ran the Charter Revision Commission did a great job of describing the Charter Revision Commission. Excellent. No, I'm fine. Thank you. I mean, I don't, it's a law, so I can't say anything. I mean, it looks great. Keep going.
Okay, let us know if you do have something to say. Okay, so we don't actually have to comment necessarily on the rulemaking. It's only if we do have comments.
I don't see.
Are there any decision points where the rulemaking as opposed to the charter language terribly affects us?
I mean, we definitely had comments on the charter amendments, but
Right, but those are
that ship
law.
has
The
sailed.
rulemaking
Yeah,
is just like
exactly.
interpretation within the bounds of the law. Is there anything
Yes.
here that actually matters to us?
I think it depends on the rules.
Right, but we have the proposed, I'm just wondering, like, having looked at the proposed rules, is there a reason why we care about the details? Like, will anything affect whether we're in the bottom 12? Or how any of this is gonna operate for us? If it doesn't, then it's not.
I think being in the bottom 12, given our desire to increase affordable housing, is a benefit.
It's a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
Yeah,
agree.
people can like it or not, but it is, right?
Yeah.
And there's no question that we'll be in it.
And no different version of the rules would change that.
There's not, I didn't see anything in the rules that didn't make sense based on what's in the new law.
Yeah.
The new charter, just saying.
Okay, wow. Okay, less is more then. Should we move on to the next agenda item?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
there is though as Adam said on second to last slide, there is an information session for all of us on the 25th of March. I think it's on the agenda. It's a Zoom by city planning to talk specifically about the rulemaking process. So I encourage you to log on, check it out. If there's any changes and someone does want to make comment, let us know.
Yeah, on the rulemaking, the one thing I would say that I think they spent a lot of time working on is that it's based on public data. So the idea is that like they can't do anything shady because it's pulling from data sources that are publicly updated, which would make it easier, I guess, to, predict which districts will be there. But there's no ability to like pick and choose which ones. It's a very like clear, obvious kind of like, okay, you take this number, you take that number, you divide it by this other number. So I think they did a pretty good job.
Okay, so should we move on to the next item?
Gail has another.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
see, but just one thing, which is that George Janes, the one thing that in all of this is concerning is West Side being one of the 12 districts that has no affordable housing. So George Janes has done an analysis. I haven't seen the final version. But one example, which is irritating to me, and I assume, Adam, it was within the time frame, is the 96th Street. I mean, that has affordable units in the building where the MTA substation used to be. It's a Freeland building. So I don't know why they were told that we had no new affordable housing. Obviously, we have a lot of SROs, which have in many cases affordable housing, permanent, and then of course some transitional. So I just want to say that analysis, because I feel like we're being compared to, I hate to say it, Vicky, Palladino's district in Queens, and we're not even close in terms of culture and appreciation for affordable housing. So I just want to say we're working on some numbers so that to be one of those 12 districts is very unfortunate. So I just want to let you know that that's one piece of this that I find data-wise is not correct, but as Adam suggested. But we'll get to the data.
I should just say, I have not worked on this at all since election day, so I'm speaking in my personal capacity, like, don't do anything for work related to this, so.
I got that, Adam. I got it.
That's interesting. I'll try to dig up the George Janes analysis and
Okay, great.
pass along. Okay, so should I pull up the resolution?
Well, just.
Do you want to start?
Yeah,
us
well,
off?
let's start off briefly. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're talking now about the Excel ABC sites. So, we want, and Seema and I and others want to come to you to get feedback, to ask for a little input, so we can take next steps. So, what we've done in the meantime, right, we had a previous effort that made some good progress. And Seema and I really worked very hard to reinvigorate this effort. So the way we see it, there's a bunch of different constituents, right? There are the people who live very close to the site, and then there's all of us in the district. And so we've dispatched Ethel and Shelley specifically, and they've done a great job working with the hyper-local people in that district, around there. And they have crafted a resolution, which we can look at tonight, but we're not gonna vote on, which doesn't at all touch anything affordable housing, and really touches quality of life, other kinds of things they would like to see in that surrounding area. But the big item we had been previously talking about is about affordable housing. And we got the developer to come back to us with some options, very vague at this point, and we want to get some input so that we can go back as part of the negotiation and try to firm up what those options would be. So remember, the demolition is almost complete on Columbus.
On two of the buildings.
On two of the
Yeah,
buildings.
definitely on Columbus.
Okay, so this project progress is well underway, right? The time is of the essence. We actually have a deadline to start responding back as part of this survey. The development is as of right? So the developer has the right to build whatever he wants, they want on the site. They have come to us, why? Because previous experiences have been financially damaging to them, and also they want to work with the community. They want to be able to say, we are getting something out of this, our building, but we're also giving something back to you. And I think they have been quite good in terms of trying to work with us, whether it be Ethel and Shelley for hyperlocal or us on affordable.
And the
Okay.
Construction task force as
And
well.
the construction task force, which we run every month, has been great. And identified different issues about noise, asbestos, burning. We had DEP here, we had a lot of. Okay, we've also, Seema and I we spoke to the borough president's housing related people. We spoke to city planning. We spoke to lots of different agencies trying to understand what is possible in terms of affordable housing on the site. So, okay, so now we can share the screen. Yes. So we have the kind of three general options to discuss. And again, we don't have all the details here, but what we want to get from you guys is kind of input, basically on ratios, on things we care about, that then Seema and I and John and Louisa can go back to the developer to try to negotiate what we think is the best option for the community. So briefly, the three options are A, completely on site. This is all within the block that's under construction. And as you see here, 120 units, 85% studio, and a very token few 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom.
This is basically the offer that was proposed back in June of.
Basically,
last year.
same exact thing.
Yeah.
Option B is you can see an increase in floor area and unit count. There is some on-site, right? You can see here, 50% studio, 20% 1-bedroom, 30% 2-bedroom, and then a much larger, off-site that includes much more 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom, which is what we had gotten from you guys previously about an emphasis on we need larger apartments. And then C is completely off-site and even larger floor area, even better mix, even more apartments. So this is the kind of like current ratio. Now, I think it would be helpful to discuss the current options, but you can also, when you give us your feedback, you can also say, I like option B, but I want a better ratio of X, Y, Z. But specifically what we want to hear from everyone and we would like to vote on is the current options as they are currently proposed based on ratio. Any suggestions or things you want to change about these options. And then basically AMI. What we've touched on this a little bit, but we don't have this nailed down either. So we want your opinion on that as well. So that's the general thing we want from everyone. And we have lots of questions.
Can I just say one more thing? So option A involved two buildings that are within the historic district. One is a new building that came to us and preservation. The second building is 7 West 66. That's just a renovation. That has not come before us yet. Option B does not include 30 West 67, the new building, but does include that 7 West 66 building, the renovation. But then
Again,
we
this
have
is,
no
this is
details.
as currently, yeah, this is as currently presented, and again, you can feel free to say,
Yeah.
I like the idea of option B, but I want this apartment of this. And to answer the question in case this comes up, no, we do not know, nor will we know what other sites the off-site are located, besides the fact that they will be within CB7. So that is the only thing, so we don't know the actual sites or sites, but they will be within CB7. And to answer your question, like that people may ask, like, you know, the mechanics, this will be, if we agree on a agreement, it will be papered in some way. There'll be a legal document of some kind. We will have some more of these specifics that we can discuss about where they might be. Of course, we will have in there like things like this is net new housing. For instance, we don't want this to be a, you know, conversion of some kind of housing. So a lot of these like transactional details will be worked out when we paper this, if we can paper this. But what we want now is the feedback on kind of the mix.
Will it be one central location or will it be scattered around the city? Or
Do you mean
scattered around
The offsite?
The offsite.
That's
Options.
feedback you could give to us. As I understand it, it would be 1 or 2 locations offsite. But there's nothing in the current offer that makes it could be scattered, but I don't know how that would work. Because again, we're saying it has to be net new.
Right.
So yes.
Net new is a little complicated as a concept because we are aware that he has vacated a building at 96th and Broadway.
Yeah.
And there's a number of units in there, and obviously whatever he's envisioning is gonna be bigger and taller and more units. But what about the ones he's eradicating? Are those
Right.
netted out, or
Right.
does he get to count?
Yeah,
those? That
exactly.
kind
So
of
we
thing.
can definitely have that written down. In our envisioning of this, right, it means like on the site. And we didn't actually say how many years, but you can't, that would not count. If you were to put 50 new building apartments in there, we would detract the 30 you've taken away. So
Yeah.
yes, that would be part
I
of
mean,
it.
right,
Yeah,
that's not new.
yeah, that's not
Makes
net new.
sense.
But
Yeah.
to your point,
Well,
right,
the new ones are not.
the
new.
net new ones are net
Yeah.
new, yeah, but it doesn't
Yeah,
count that
it's-
you've destroyed 30 to get there. Yes. Okay,
So I find this confusing. First, it wasn't confusing until you guys started talking, but.
Sorry.
Seema, you said, that B, okay, so what we've been exposed to a lot is the proposed demolition, and now LPC's agreed to the demolition of the ABC building at 30 West 67th. And they have proposed, and that is part of A, a large part of A, what was going to be something like 89
Mhm.
Yes.
studios for seniors, all affordable. Okay. I thought what you now just said, though, is that B doesn't include 30 West 67th. So what does that mean? How does that sort out with new affordables, 30 West 67th?
Presumably, they would do market rate there.
Oh, okay, so
Presumably.
those affordables with
yeah.
Yeah,
are
they
gone.
didn't,
Yeah,
they
under-
didn't tell us
under B.
what they
Right.
would do with that, but that's
Okay.
what we assume.
Yeah, but again, your feedback to us could be, I like B, but we actually don't like the 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and we prefer the 30 West 66 than
Right,
the-
right, right.
So again, that's what we're looking.
Yeah, and then the other question,
So-
Alex, I think you sort of started getting there, and Beverly certainly said something I hadn't known, which is, that Extel has acquired a building at 96th and Broadway. But in order for the off-site to be in our district, or even if it wasn't, Excel has to buy real estate somewhere
Mhm.
in our district
Mhm.
and either demolish it and start over or somehow make it taller or something,
Yeah.
right? I mean, do we have any reason to think that's doable? I have infinite money, so I guess.
I think the thing that personally I like about, they have indicated that is the plan. They have indicated that they have a few sites that they're looking at, that they potentially have options for that have been included. The thing that again makes me, that I like about option B and C is for what we think about Extel, they're great at getting stuff done and getting things built. And what we struggle with in our district a lot is getting stuff done and getting stuff built. And so this would not be and again, we would be papering this would not be like, we hope in 25 years we have a building. This would be in conjunction with the current site on West 66.
Rich?
Go ahead.
Can we specify when those apartments go online if they're on
Yeah.
site?
Great, yeah. We were thinking about that. I think there's a few different options I would love for you guys to talk about it. I mean, one option we should talk about is like, you do not get your certificate of occupancy for Columbus Avenue site until, X has commenced in the offsite. So one option is you say you do not get your certificate of occupancy until construction has commenced, planning has commenced, certificate of occupancy has been achieved in the offsite. So what I'm getting from you is we want to make sure there is something in there that makes it
Ties it
happen,
together.
ties it together.
I would eliminate A as a possibility. I don't see any advantage to anybody.
Speak loud.
doing that. Between B and C, it matters a lot. I'm sure to a lot of people, even more than to me, where these other sites are and what the deal is. And I think we ought to say, if we go back and say we want option C, but we want details before we commit ourselves to it. And as you said, some mechanism to force, to create a timeline or a time limit. So that before anyone can move into
Yep.
the ABC buildings, there has to be at least foundation laid or construction or
Yeah.
something on
Yeah.
the offsite.
Just to ask one follow-up question. And I agree with you, but I want to know why you think this is the case. What do you mean people? Tell me more about, tell me more about the comment, people will care where it
I
is.
will.
Okay.
There is a sense.
Yeah.
That, that they want to keep the affordable housing in the neighborhood so that the neighborhood becomes less segregated. And also there's some people have said that maybe schools in this district need more students,
No, I know, that's why we wanted in CB7, yes, but what?
No, but not just CVs, but in the lower,
Ah,
The southern part of.
because there are fewer public school
mm,
kids.
mm,
I would like to know, and also we've had experiences where developers have dragged their feet on the affordable part, or they've sold it to somebody else.
yeah,
This ought to be non-transferable obligation, I think.
yeah,
We know who we're dealing with when we're dealing with
Yes.
Excel. We don't know who we're dealing with if they transfer, those things. So I think we ought to, maybe if we come back to them, if everybody agree, I mean, we're interested in C because
Yeah.
it provides the most affordable housing.
Mhm.
But before we can commit ourselves, we need to know details and we need to have details about enforceability.
I think that's fair. All right, we're gonna go to the committee first and then we'll get the vote.
I'm gonna just start off my position as I'm pretty much strongly on C. But the idea of tying the CO to the other buildings has been written before and it's gone into restricted decks and it's gone into ULURPs. And it hasn't been observed and it hasn't been enforced and it's been very problematic. So I wouldn't count on that. It's nice for
Yeah,
put things in a post and things like that. but
Yeah.
It presents problems. In reality, it's gonna be in his interest to build this as quickly as possible, because if he's using the land at 96th Street, or if he's using land at 97th in Amsterdam, remember, he buys and sells stuff like some of us change our underwear, remember that? In fact, does it more often. But anyway, whatever it is, well, 4 times a day,
all right, let's keep going.
Anyway, the point being that he has substantial carrying costs for these sites. These are not cheap sites. And he can build this building, he can build a 120,000 square foot building, depending on what the site is. If it's a block and plank building or 2 block and plank buildings, he can turn those out in 18 months. It's a concrete frame building, 15 stories, so he can do that in 30 months. He's gonna be on the ABC site for 5 years building. That's the reality of it. So there's an interest in him getting this moving as fast as possible, particularly if he has other uses happening in this building. If he has a community facility use, or if he has retail use, he's really gonna wanna move this along. My last comment is, because I'm also on the education committee, because of the class size mandate, a lot of the schools that had a lot of seats 3 years ago actually don't have any seats right now. And that's another problem. So for example, that's why PS9 and Central School have to divorce each other. And that's gonna happen in more and more schools as we move through this process.
Good feedback
That's
on,
all I gotta say.
yeah, good feedback on the papering. Go
Wait,
for
can
it.
I ask one question, just to follow up? So do you think there's a better mechanism to the whole tying it to C of O? Is there another way to do it that you think is better?
I don't know how to do it, because like I said, there's some sites that I followed very carefully from Columbia University in Manhattanville, where there were other buildings tied. And either nobody's watching or people are watching and just not
Can't make.
observing.
One of the things that someone suggested in the housing, we spoke to them was, some kind of bond / money that's frozen in some account. So there's some kind of financial penalty, even more so than the carrying costs. Such that like, if you don't develop by X time, you start losing this
See,
frozen.
but then
money.
you can make an economic calculation.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Yes. But any of these are ways of trying to like,
But it's not
again,
either or.
put the way on the side of why you would not want to have it. Go for it, Howard.
But it's a known penalty.
Yeah.
And he can figure it out.
Yeah.
My question is, this issue, that issue, the enforcement issue comes up in every one of these deals. So this has to be something that's
Yeah.
been studied.
There's a few ways, yeah.
So what's unique is we have to make a decision as to how much we want and where we want it. But the enforcement mechanism,
Yeah, we'll work on
I don't
that.
know what the answer
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
but
we'll-
there are
applies to
people
all
who
three
know.
scenarios.
Yeah.
I'm sure Adam probably
Yeah,
knows the
yeah.
answer.
Yeah, I think that's.
But I just want to say something about my preference. I think when it comes down to the preference, C is a no-brainer because we shouldn't be imposing our own subjective judgment as to where we would like to live on this issue. People need affordable housing. I grew up in affordable housing. The more, the better. And it may not be where you might want to be, but I think that just having more housing is a good thing. And so that's why I think, to me, C is a no-brainer.
I like B, but also would be fine with C. I think a couple things that we should stipulate. I think like if there is offsite, we should say that it should be new construction, not renovation. I think would be helpful.
Wait, one question though.
Why?
What if, well, I guess in our saying it's net, aren't we saying that? But I guess
No.
what if it's,
Well, the 96 would be new construction. He's gonna tear down whatever.
okay, but you're just saying you're saying it doesn't, by saying we want it to be a net new apartments, it doesn't accomplish.
I guess net new apartments
Right?
could
Yeah.
work too. But I will say that like, that would allow him to like, he could buy a building and put regulatory agreements on something.
Yeah, we don't
I'm
want
saying
that.
I don't want.
Yeah, we don't want
Yeah,
that, right.
That's why I like
yeah.
new construction and also like, we would be getting maximum value by
Yes.
forcing him to do
Right.
that.
Good point.
What is a
Um,
regulatory agreement?
Like that, let's say he could, for example, he could buy a Mitchell Lama building that went co-op.
Right.
That's a bad example. He could buy just a standard rental building, market rate rental, and he could
Yeah.
put a regulatory agreement to be like, okay, all of these units in it are now like affordable
for this
with the existing tenants or something,
Without building.
without building
Oh.
anything.
Units.
So we don't
Yeah.
want that obviously
Yeah.
because it's
Okay.
just.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the
Yeah.
old
Right.
inclusionary.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that the offsite cannot fulfill a mandatory inclusionary housing requirement or a 485X requirement. So you could imagine like, maybe he's gonna build another market rate building and use 485X, like he can't
They're
double
dipping.
count
Yeah.
the
Right.
units.
And you
Um,
mean to that to then help the property on Columbus?
Well, it would just be like, let's say on 96th Street, he decides.
But this is, but the Columbus is condos, isn't that even?
Yeah, I know, I'm saying, but let's say at some other site, the offsite, he decides, and I make 188 units on
Yeah.
site C. He could say, okay, well, site C, I'm gonna build an 1,000 unit market rate building. To get the tax abatement, I
Right.
have to build some number that are affordable, and I'm gonna
Right.
double count
But the
them.
problem there is we would have gotten those units anyways.
Exactly, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
he would-
benefit
he would
us.
be
So I'm
forced to
saying
do
that
that.
they
Good point.
can't fulfill some other
Good point.
requirement.
Okay,
And in terms of where the AMI should be set,
yes.
my understanding is that he's gonna build these buildings and then turn them over.
No,
he's just, he's
We don't,
gonna,
we don't know,
Okay.
if that's the answer.
if,
That was the answer for the studios on site.
okay,
But I don't think that's the answer for the offsite.
okay, if it is a situation where he is not operating them.
Yeah,
And it's being turned, which would be my preference, is
Right.
for him to operate them, because then he has to pay the operating subsidy for them versus if he builds a building and turns it over to Wishfish, for example, the rents of the people in the building are not gonna be enough to pay the operating costs, so the city will have to still subsidize it versus if he operates the building, he has to pay it. In that case, I would say the AMI should be set by the nonprofit that's operating the building. So the nonprofit should say like, we think we could operate this building best if the AMIs are 60%. Or they could say it would operate best if it was 40%, or they could say, we want it to be like a building for people straight out of homelessness, so we think it should be 30%, or whatever it is. But if he's operating the building, then we should set it.
So
Well,
AMI.
what
what
you
makes
say
you think it's
operating
a
the building?
nonprofit?
That's what's been
Define
discussed.
that.
in the original discussion for the
Yeah.
on-site option, it was this was never like written anywhere, but the general understanding was this would be some supportive housing operator would then take over this building, run the site for him. I don't think that's what we're talking about for B and C though. Or for C. I think the offsite is not supportive housing in that sense, but
Yeah, I don't know.
we don't
But
know.
presumably,
Affordable housing, there are a lot of,
Yes,
there are a lot of for-profit affordable
Yeah,
housing
yeah.
developers.
Right.
And a lot of them are reputable.
Yeah.
And most of them have been my
right,
clients.
right. So yeah, so I don't think that applies, but Adam makes a good point about the AMI. We don't want it to be, we don't want to be a situation where the city ends up on the hook for funding some degree of the operating expenses ongoing. So
But
I
if
think
you
that's.
think of any number of people live in our district who are affordable housing developers who run buildings like
Yeah.
this. And would love to have a building in our district.
Good questions, keep going.
Yeah, okay, so I don't need to fall in it, but I'm all for C, our district is heavily desirable, like I live on 104th Street. I don't think it needs to be any, like, there's not a bad location in our district, so we should
Right.
go for maximum units. On board with being very strict about net new housing, meaning, and, we don't need to be hyper specific now, because this is negotiation
right.
guidelines. But if it's something that went offline 3 years ago, you don't get to count that as
Right.
net, something that has not been housing at all in the recent past.
Yeah.
Is the only thing that, you can add to it. And I don't think we need to get granular about exactly how it's operated or what the COI thresholds are. The big picture points, and we just be straight up transparent
Right.
about this, is we do not want the affordable offsite projects to drag out while he prioritizes the main market rate project. There have to be some reasonable mechanisms to ensure that they
Mhm.
go at the same pace. We can talk about what those might be.
Mhm.
But, whatever works and is gonna be reasonable, and the same deal with, I think the same deal with the nonprofit operators or whatever, the point isn't who operates. The point is like, this isn't gonna suck up government money from somewhere.
Right,
And it's not gonna get him more market rate units through MIH. This has to be new affordable units that is not city subsidized,
right,
that is new housing,
right.
and that, like, will get done expeditiously.
Okay, Seema?
Sounds good.
Can I just throw out some numbers? So we have talked in our previous resolutions about wanting 20% and then 30% of the residential square footage for affordable housing. This does not come anywhere near that. So if using some really high numbers that he gave us back in June of last year, the total project is 1.1 million to 1.6 million square feet.
You mean the ABC site?
The project site, right? So that would be the basis of like in an MIH situation, let's pretend, even though this is not. So 20% of that would put it at 220K to 320K.
Mm.
30% is 330 to 480K. So I just want to throw that out there so we don't anchor on the numbers that they give us.
Yeah, I
And
think-
I feel like also if it's offsite, the way that MIH works is that you would need to provide a bonus 5%. And I recognize that MIH is not what we're going for, but I do think that the principle of if it's offsite, we should get more.
Yeah, I think basically
right.
what you're saying from this resolution, what I'm hearing is that you like option C. I strongly think that the answer should be, we like option C, but then the current numbers are too low.
Yeah, but give us
Right.
300.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we want 300 units and we
Oh,
want.
no, I meant 300,000 square
Okay,
feet.
300,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Of this mix, because yes, that's what one would expect, like
that's
you
like
have a
a-
bigger bounty.
That's an amount of affordable housing worthy of this
Right.
Right,
magnitude
when we're-
project.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just.
There you go.
I was gonna say, I agree with that. These are lower numbers than we've been talking about. I'm very excited that C is the most, so I'm
Yeah.
not opposed to it, but I do think there's something important about B, a part of it being on site. It's very clear about how this has been set up, that Extel does not want the housing on site because they're continuously incentivizing by building better and more housing if it's further and further away from the site. And so I think there's something important about B, that we're taking a stand and saying, actually, no, we think people should live together and that we shouldn't just automatically push people off the site and therefore get more housing. Like, I think taking a stand and saying no, that people of different income levels should be living on the same site. So I think there is something important in B. Again, can we argue for more units? Of course, but saying, no, we think it's important that people are able to live together and that we don't segment people based on income. I also, again, if we're talking about incentives, I do wonder, like, the proximity of this building being near on the site. Like, if I'm buying a luxury condo, I don't want construction across from me. So can we say, like, you know, if the building that is on site is like within the sort of realm of where this development is happening, there is a sort of a natural incentive, because I don't want my luxury condo to be next to an open construction site. And so there's sort of like the streamlining of processes. He's gonna build these buildings together. There's something to be said about that. So I agree. Obviously, I want more housing, and like C right now is giving us the best quality housing and the most housing. But can we argue for some type of B situation that has more housing and a better mix? Clearly, he doesn't want to build this on site. That's why he keeps incentivizing us to pull it off the site.
Yeah, I think I agree with you
That's
also
another
that B is, yeah.
So follow up, do you have any ideas about like what the mix should be, like if, for B, like how much you'd want on-site versus off-site?
I mean, right now, I'm not sure what the percentages are exactly, but like, at least, I don't know, baseline 50-50, like, I think we should be pretty strong in the opinion that like, there should be a lot of on-site housing.
Yeah, so we should try for more on-site housing. I think, yeah, okay.
I just don't want us to get swayed, because obviously C is the most housing, and like, I
Right,
want the
right,
most
we
housing,
want
but
more
he's
housing.
trying to sway me by giving me the best and the most
Yeah.
off-site.
I mean, yeah, okay.
So I largely agree with Miriam about this, and I think it's not just. Excel thinks their market is, I don't like to just say he, but is, for people who don't want to have a construction site by their luxury condominiums. They also just don't want a affordable, you know, an all affordable building by their luxury condominiums. And I think for us, it is the mix of people at the ABC site is important. For me, it's important. I came in really kind of favoring A, although I didn't understand then that the offsite would be in our district. There was nothing. Okay, so that's a kind of premature editing point for the resolution. I don't think anything in this resolution as drafted says offsites in our district, and that is.
We can.
So that's
Yeah.
gotta be in there. So,
As of right.
yeah, I mean,
Our deal.
well, I think I've been talked out of A maybe because, we're talking in our district, which I don't know. There really is, I think. I have a sense you want to really vary I mean, diversity, you can get arrested these days in center. Another country if you use the word diversity, but, we want it all over our district, and to just push them all out of the ABC site doesn't feel right to me. Another question though about losing A. So not only would that mean that 30 West 67th would be presumably another whole bunch of luxury condos, but what about the 66th Street conversion? How does that get knocked out of, or does that lose its affordability also?
Well,
If we
that's,
go to B or C?
that stays in B. The 66th Street stays in B. That is the on-site component of B.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
In progress. It's still a lot of studios.
Still a lot of,
Yeah.
that building is more first of all, it's a renovation and it's more awkward in terms of light and air. So the layouts are a little bit funky.
So I'm hearing a lot of B from you.
Kind of,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm also a B because I think there is a benefit to on-site, and I also think there's a benefit not to concentrating affordable housing in the upper portion of our district because of the burden on the schools, among other things. But what worries me is for off-site, how we make sure that there's a requirement to maintain it in good repair. I mean, they could offload everybody into a building that is then, you know, sold to who knows whom and not maintained in any particular way. So I'd like to see something that requires the maintenance to be at least as good as what is at the new development site.
Okay. Yeah. Any other thoughts from people in the community?
Ira, you had something?
Yeah,
Sorry.
just on the, on the, net.
Yeah.
Net new construction. To take the 96th Street building as an example, my guess is that there was no affordable housing in that building when it was vacated. So any one affordable housing would be a net gain of one.
It was rent stabilized, Dick. It was rent stabilized, the building.
It was rent stabilized?
Yeah.
100%.
100% at this point in time, the typical.
Right.
Side
Yes.
is about 30%
Right.
stabilized,
Yeah, you know,
67% market.
I think it's probably too much to saddle him with the apartments which no longer exist and which were vacated before this thing was negotiated. I think if he
Yeah.
builds 188 apartments and there were no affordable units there when we made this deal, that ought to be.
Okay, I get your point. I think, again, we'll come back to this as we make progress in the direction.
The more, I hear, when I think about it, I think we ought to go to him now with a list of questions. He's obviously reluctant to disclose the exact locations because, in part because he's, he doesn't like the world to know what he's doing. And it may be that there's some kind of a secretive, some kind of a commitment that we can make to keep it confidential. But a lot of the questions that have been raised tonight can be answered in advance.
Yeah, but we're gonna do that before the final papering. What we need is to vote on this. What we need to do is vote on this tonight because otherwise.
These are crucial. I mean, I think, my view, my vote would be C, but I want to know more.
Okay, well, you can specify the but then, but we do need a vote because, again, like we do have a clock that is running. We can get some of these details. I'll tell you what they're gonna say is, we have options
Right.
to purchase different sites, but we have not, they're not solidified yet because we're waiting to hear what you want. So again, we can't go back with more questions. We're gonna go back tonight with some version of ABC, but yes, it can be C with,
Reservations.
with reservations. That's fine.
Yeah.
Let's go a little bit more of the committee and then we can hear from people.
I just want to point out, there may be other parties looking at the same site.
Yeah, exactly.
So we may completely lose out.
Right,
on
exactly.
these sites.
That is what he
Definitely
said.
Don't
We
go
also
there.
have to
Exactly.
remember-
Because that happened before, right?
Yeah, that happened before. There was actually a site nearby, 66, that also they've lost that.
Yeah, it was a six.
So again, this is the thing is
That's
moving.
the other thing that I wanted to comment on, that was, we demanded 30% affordable, and that was never, it was never gonna happen, and 20% was never gonna happen for the simple reason that this is an as-of-right project. And the only leverage we have is that he doesn't want to go through another litigation like he went through on 67.
Yes.
And at a certain point, he may say, all right, I can't deal with Community Board 7, I'm just gonna go ahead and build as of right, no affordable housing. So I wouldn't be too greedy.
Right.
That is risk.
188 units, it's 188 units.
Don't worry, you have a crack negotiation team who is pushing the envelope and.
I'm sure.
But let's go to other people, go to the public.
A quick point. So when we say net new, is it net new affordable or just net new units?
Then no affordable.
affordable.
Okay, so for example, in the previous offer, we like, there was this dorm room on 65th Street. It's whatever, 100 units. I wanna buy that building, renovate it and make all 100 units affordable. That is 100 new. That's 100 net new,
No, no, I wouldn't
or
call that's it that.
zero.
I would, look, we can
Were they-
decide what it
I'm
means,
asking,
yeah. but
I'm
that's-
asking the question.
You're saying
That's a
net
good
new
question.
housing versus net new affordable.
I'm asking the
Yeah.
question. When you said that, what was
That's
your,
tricky.
What?
I mean, in that example, that the.
because that's a real
the dorm-
example.
Yeah, I know, but the
Yeah.
dorm room was market rate.
It was a dorm
It's a
room.
dorm.
It's a dorm
Yeah.
room, right, that's not the right, yeah.
I mean, the what we don't want to have happen is what Gail and we were saying, which is we've taken a building that had
Yeah.
completely rent stabilized affordable units. You've gotten everyone to move out over a
Yeah.
5-year period.
Right.
You've lost 50 units.
Yeah,
You build 60 and you say I did or you build 188 and you say I did 188.
Yeah.
We wanna be like, no, that's actually 130.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right.
because that's not net new affordable.
Right, exactly.
But what if he buys a market rate building
Yeah.
that's.
I mean, I
100
didn't even
units?
think that was a thing, but maybe that is a thing. But okay, we can, again, that could be part of, okay. We could come back, we could come back to that. All right, we're talking,
Guys,
More
guys.
conversation,
crosstalk. Okay, that's a good point. We'll come back to that. As we get closer with the negotiation, we can come back.
I mean, I
to
think
that.
we just wanna disincentivize emptying a building
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
and using those. Like, that's the goal.
Okay, let's
How
go
do we
to
do
the
it? is
members of the
the
community.
Wait, hang on, I had one more suggestion. I'd like to suggest, I don't think we need to pick A, B, or C. I think that we need to pass a resolution with some general principles. People are somewhere between B and C. I would say like, well, we are, and we can just state some priorities, which is the maximum number of net new affordable units, which means it has to be a new unit. It cannot replace a market rate unit. It has to be affordable. It has to not be double counted. We have to have reasonable assurance that it is going to be well run and professionally run without government subsidies. We are open to discussing the differences between B and C, depending on the specifics of what we learn about what C means. But I don't think we should phrase this in terms of their letter, and we should certainly be clear that the unit count is not in our resolution. We're not gonna say what our
Right.
bottom line here is.
Yeah.
That we're saying that.
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with that, but I would say it would make my job, our job easier if I got some directional feedback from you guys on between B and C. Like, because otherwise it is a little bit too much like everything is on the table.
Right.
So I
doesn't-
would like if we could vote to say
Yeah, I think we
people
should vote
want
on
B
it.
or C.
Yeah.
Polly hasn't said it.
I would choose C, start with, for me, I would choose C, because I feel like we need to maximize and get as many affordable units as we can, brand new building off-site, okay? AMI I would like to see is 80 to 120, and I feel that we should just start out with a basic response.
Mhm.
Because all that other additional requests that are being discussed
Yeah.
right now, that kind of takes it off track. You
Mhm.
see what his response is, you start with that, and then when you guys have your discussion, you build upon the other points that everyone raised. Nothing really can be finalized, because everyone's guessing, what if
Right.
he does this, what if, we're not in his head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he said to come back with something, so for me, it's C, off-site,
Good point.
AMI.
Let's hear from other people in the community and then public.
I like that.
So,
No, you go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
It's not, like, it doesn't seem, my understanding here is we don't really have a negotiation chip here. It's like he's doing this out of the kindness of his heart.
Pretty much.
Well, we have,
I mean,
we have developed a reason why we should work together. But yes, there's no like legal threat we have to force this.
Okay.
No leverage. Leverage, all right, no formal leverage, as Gail said.
Okay, so I guess somebody earlier mentioned that there are like existing mechanisms for enforcing this type of stuff. I think we can look at the headlines in the news on all of the buildings that have signed agreements and not, or developers that have signed agreements and, 15, 20 years later, still haven't built anything despite fines that the city doesn't collect.
Mhm.
So we should just keep that in mind, that if, whatever the hooks that already exist clearly in a number of cases haven't worked. I think there's something in like the Brooklyn Yards or project. I think there's something in Gowanus that's a similar story. So
We will learn from those mistakes.
yeah, I don't know what those, I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what the mistakes are. It's not my expertise. I'm just saying like, how we should have a plan for how to avoid that.
Good feedback.
And then, yeah, it was not clear to me, like, why does he have to do this at all? It sounds
Yeah.
like you've got, some compromise or some,
Yeah.
pictures of it, some pictures of it putting recycling in the trash or something that's gonna
Definitely.
make him do it.
Something like that.
Okay, and then, I guess my final comment would just be, the thing I like about B, if we were to do it, is that, these buildings are really expensive to run and operate, and especially with these units that likely don't cover the costs, and if you do something like B where there's a mix,
Yeah.
that maybe helps, but I would, I don't know how that works with condos, because if 90% of the building's owned by individuals, and then 10% is owned by somebody else, like, it's weird, so I don't know what you're gonna do there.
Good point. Austin, yell loud.
Hi, I got the block. My name is Austin. I was born in the neighborhood, and I would kind of lean towards B. We're talking about, the fact that the Excel has control over, we have control over, but we also know that the market for new construction for buying a property is very volatile. There are factors that they themselves can't control, and as much as we might want to tie things together, tie new affordable housing on our site, which into new housing and well, they don't have a site right now. And even if they were completely altruistic, it's like, okay, we're gonna go find this site right now. They might get outbid, some finances might get screwed up. So at least with B, if worst case scenario happens, you get a little bit more housing than you would from option A, but B, you're still getting housing guaranteed if at least some of it is on site.
Good point.
And
Interesting.
also it's it's obviously very tantalizing to look at the list and say, oh, you have a lot more units on option C, but the volatility of the market, the volatility of housing construction, finance, and God knows what happens with the tariffs. We don't know if our orange and cheek is going to decide to go rogue again and things. So
Good point, Austin.
I think the volatility makes it enticing to have more of those units on site. And I'd also make the point that it sounds like one site is 96th Street. And
That's definitely not been said.
Oh.
That's just
That's just speculation.
general
that's
speculation.
I would say, obviously you don't have these details, but I think a point that would make every single affordable unit that we've gotten post-COVID has been 96th Street and above. And the last bit has been, I think, basically Borderline Square, which is South Fordham. There's one building in between 66 and 96 that is built for affordable housing in, I think, 20 years.
Yeah.
So I
it's
think
nice about B that we would be breaking that cycle.
you'd be breaking that cycle, number one, but I'd also say a point of leverage, like depending upon what site gets chosen, I think that kind of leverage, like I would be more comfortable with a C-type option if we knew they had, a site on 86 or a site on 77 or in that middle ground that literally hasn't done anything since 2014. You could say, oh, there's a good place to break it up and get something big versus, oh, give them site C, they go to 110th Street because there's that lot over there that they can do whatever. And this is wishful thinking. Perhaps Prop 3 gets involved and they could potentially be open to exploring an ELERP if it's a mixed income project, because that's not as tenuous of a process. And maybe we'll see what happens with the secret reform at the state level. And we have that commitment from the deputy mayor of housing that if secret reforms pass and the city is given its leverage, they will attempt to cut down the process to 6 months, which is a lot of time and a lot more stability. So that's another factor to consider. But again, I know that state budget's probably not gonna get passed next year.
Good feedback. All right, let's go to other people.
Jody?
I have 2 questions and 2 observations. Is Gail still on?
She's on.
Gail, a couple of months ago, you had suggested at a Westside Dems meeting that you were going to be talking to Edith Sue Chen. Did that ever happen?
Yeah, no, I'm meeting with them next week, the whole CPC and HPD.
And would that be about the Excel project?
Yes.
Would that give any leverage to, the negotiations happening here?
We'll see. I mean, I'm pretty tough in asking, so we'll see. I don't know. I hope so. I hope I don't think they're gonna, I think they want poor people not to be shoved away.
Okay, the second question I have is when did the negotiating committee of seven get these offers? When did they get the offers of the additional Plan B and Plan C? Like, was it 2 months ago?
No,
2 weeks ago,
15 days
an hour
ago. 15 days ago.
15 days ago, because honestly, I believe you can get,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, a lot more, because if you look at the numbers for C, I don't understand the numbers for C.
Mhm.
Because you're getting about 50% more space, and you're gonna turn these minuscule studios spaces from the first plan, you're gonna make them 2 bedrooms?
Mm.
How do the numbers work for these apartments? They
The-
just don't, that's
It's a
not the
different
scale of
location.
the
It's a
apartments
different-
just
It's a-
don't-
Yeah,
Just a totally different
It's a
building.
different building.
I don't care, but the square footage is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think the part of the challenge is like the other building, is an existing building and has some complexities about how the site is laid out. But it's a fair point from you that like we are trying to, we are trying to maximize the number of apartments, so that's a good point.
Right, but also the size of the apartment.
Yeah,
is
size
an
and number.
issue, because when I look at that square footage, I don't
Yeah.
see how the numbers work.
Great, all right.
That's interesting.
Other person? Yeah,
I vote for C
okay.
because we need as much housing affordable as possible, and I am confident by the fact that it is gonna be in our district.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 96th Street is a great area to
Mhm.
live as well. And I know, I have personally been in Waterline Square where there are mixed income living in the same
Mhm.
building, and I think there is a lot to be said about that. But that is a nice to have, and more housing affordable is a must have.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I will say like Extel also has many different, the area houses, which are on
99
1099.
and Broadway.
So like, there's lots of examples of building market rate above 90.
We also have 2 hands online.
Okay,
Please go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, Felix here. Thanks,
Louder.
Felix here. Thank you for just bringing this up and the really helpful discussion up to now. Going in, I was biased towards option C, just maximize numbers, but thinking through the issues, how much we don't know, I think option B makes the most sense to me now because that does preserve, like, then Extel has an incentive to actually build those units to the
Mhm.
earlier points about we don't want to build something and then have a construction site next door for decades onwards. So I'm inclined to support option B with all the questions that have been raised
Great.
there are a lot of unknowns.
Erica, and then we'll go to UMatch, but Erica.
And also Miranda.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was at Amsterdam Houses and now I'm doing bedtime. But I've been, yes. But I've been following along with the conversation. And I just wanted to point out, wherever the discussion leads you, but, and Gail knows this, for Harborview and for Hudson Yards, the thing I would just make sure if you did go the C route, they never built the affordable housing, for the Hudson Yards agreement in CB4. And so we're still having conversations with the city to do that. But I just want to, say that sometimes it's not ironclad and that they could get out of it. So just however you negotiate that would be important just to keep in mind that it's very easy to get out of.
I think that further
to
strengthens
know.
Austin's point, but yeah, good
Yeah.
point. All right, Madge, go for it.
I like B better too, because I think they're more likely to build that 67th Street building than they are any others. They're gonna have all the equipment. It's all gonna be going on at the same time. That's why I think you shouldn't abandon that part of it by doing a C.
Great. All right,
And
Miranda.
you need it in this district too, in this part of the district.
All right, Miranda.
Oh, no, I was just raising my hand to get elevated, just to
Oh,
vote,
yeah.
yeah.
No problem. All right, should we do some voting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I
Should
just
I-
add a couple comments?
Yeah.
Sure. One is, there's no such thing as ironclad.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been on the board for 30+ years, and I was not on the board, although Richard was, and Shelley was, I think, at the time when all of the very complicated restrictive declaration for Riverside South was negotiated. And aside from anything else, private developers always out negotiate, out fox whoever it is, whether it's the community ultimately. A great deal of what was supposedly ironclad in Riverside South, and it's now 30+ years later, all of it was supposed to theoretically gonna be happening, in 5, 10 years. Some of it still isn't finished, but aside from what's unfinished, lots and lots and lots of things have not happened there that were supposed to happen, and we can't assume that whatever we paper, it's gonna be ironclad.
I think it's totally true. I would just say this applies to all the options. I mean,
Yeah,
we could
yeah.
totally, we could say, great, we love option A, and they could be like, actually, this Robert Stern building, I don't know, market has turned.
Yeah.
This will now be
And
for
then just the other quick thing I wanted to say is what nobody's been talking about since Richard mentioned it a while ago is however unlikely we are to achieve it, whatever else we say here, we should not lose track of our seeking on a square footage basis, the full 30%.
Definitely. Definitely.
Ask a quick question. Is there no reason we can get a contract? I mean, if that's not possible.
We can try the enforceability
Yeah,
of
we
it.
can
is
try. I
difficult.
mean, like, government agencies will not be having a contract with a private developer. Like, that's definitely not possible. But there are other mechanisms which we've discussed where other contracts will have, but like even, this is true in other examples. There are many ways out of a contract, but that's true of everything. So we shouldn't like be super pessimistic of this. But let's keep going, Adam, and wrap it up.
I was just gonna say two things. One, the powerful thing here is that like Gary Barnett is like a repeat player, so there is some incentive. Like the fact that he got burned on the other building with the lawsuit is why he's here. And I think it's like this is not the last thing he's gonna do in New York City. So to some degree, if he like totally screws us, like that will make it so much harder for him in the future. And I think that it creates an interesting dynamic that gives me some confidence. I was gonna put something forward for a vote to move things along, which was that we do the ideas about like that it being net new. Cause I think that will actually give you guys some real clarity in your negotiations with them, and they may say like, yes, we can do that, or no, we can't do that, or that we didn't know that's what you guys wanted. And I was gonna say, I found B very compelling, so I was gonna say, let's take a vote on B and see if it passes.
I was gonna first ask people to say, like, raise one finger for A, 2 fingers for B, 3 fingers for C.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
start
we
on
can do
that.
So we
yeah.
don't do that, but then we can go to yours.
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
Hold on, should we ask
I
Gail if she has
just,
any last comments
Oh, yeah. that's a
before
good
we?
thought.
Go for it.
But, I don't think it's too much to ask at this point to ask Gary to pay for a lawyer that we hired.
I think again, that could happen in the further stages. But yes, sure.
But I want to, put it on the table now.
Okay,
Right.
that's something we can consider. Sure,
It's a fraction of,
right,
and for him, it's nothing.
sure,
And he wouldn't control the lawyer, we would.
right. Hopefully, yes. All right, should we,
Hold on, any last comments from Gail?
Gail, you're
Gail,
muted.
you're talking, but you're muted.
Gail, you're muted.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I mean, I have to say, I do think that we would be criticized heavily if we don't have some affordable housing on the site. Obviously, I want more than what you're suggesting, but people will think that, it's racist. I'm just saying, that's what they're gonna tell us. So you gotta have to decide how you feel about that. I think we should make sure we get the 30%. He sells immediately. He has not held on to one building, just so you know. Look at Two Bridges. Two Bridges is market and right next door affordable. A nonprofit runs it. So I'm just saying, don't think he's gonna keep whatever 96th Street or wherever else. Maybe that's fine to have a nonprofit run it. But, just be clear, he's not gonna hold on to, he does not own any buildings that have affordable people in it, period. He sold it, I got 500 units at Riverside Center, and he sold it immediately, within seconds,
right,
just so you know.
good feedback. All right, I think Austin, we're gonna do the voting. but-
Straw poll?
Yes, let's do straw poll first. So, members of the community board, 1 finger for A, 2 fingers for B, and 3 fingers for C.
How about a 2.5?
Not allowed, not allowed. You have to make up your mind, and then help me count.
Okay,
So we got, well, you don't compare.
I'll do 2s, you do 3s. How's
No,
that?
you do, everyone do it twice.
Okay.
Looks like the twos. Looks like two's got it. A lot.
Depends on which side of the table you look at.
We've come a long way from.
I actually think I have 7 and 7.
I have 7 Bs. Hold on, wait, let me do,
Wait.
keep your hands up. 1, 2.
Oh, yeah, we need.
It's actually
Three,
7 and
four.
7.
It's 7 and 7.
No, we
Oh,
gotta get
Miranda's
online.
voting B.
Well,
5,
Miranda, what are you
6.
voting?
7.
Miranda's voting B. Madge, and you're voting B, Madge?
Yes.
That is
Okay,
B.
so 8 to 6.
Are you separating?
But it's
Are you
interesting.
separating committee
Wait,
members
what was
and
Miranda?
non-committee members, or this is
No,
just
I'm
a straw
just.
poll right now?
Yeah, Miranda
What was
was B,
Okay, so 8 to 7.
8
no?
to 7.
8 to 7.
No,
But it's-
Madge.
Nine
From
and
nine
nine
to
to
seven.
Also B.
9
But
to
it's
7.
interesting, good feedback. That's good for me to know where we stand.
That's why I like my 2.5. Just to give us.
Completely unhelpful.
Which is what Gail's
Gary's gonna-
suggesting.
Gary's gonna have someone watch the video of this, right? Like,
Yeah,
so
of
all of
course.
this is gonna be here. So I mean, what
Yeah.
we're really saying is that we like option B, and if he wants to push us towards C, he's gonna make it really, really, really worthwhile to shift us in that
Which is
direction.
good for
Wait,
us
so
the building.
The other, wait, the other feedback is this net new idea. And then are we going to mention shooting for square footage? That's maybe closer to what we've asked for in the
We
past.
shouldn't abandon that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think with the, so, okay, yeah, now
Listen,
let's go to the resolution time.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the resolution should be, as Adam is saying, we should have our net new.
Yep,
We should say, we favor B. But, also interested in C depending on something. And, I think we should say we reaffirm our call for 30%.
And no double dipping.
Yeah. I mean,
30% of square footage.
yeah,
Yes.
And no,
But
no double
also
dipping with
the thing-
another development.
The affordable apartments are available. for
Right, right.
people Around the same time.
right, expedited, we don't
Yeah.
want this to be some kind of, sorry.
No delays
Alex,
and
I don't
really
think-
net new.
As you phrased it, well, it was a straw vote and it was fairly close.
Yeah.
But I don't think to say we're also interested in C.
Right, I know.
It depending upon, that's just an invitation, B is
Okay, so just say
gone.
B, Okay,
Yeah.
good
How about
point.
this? Okay,
Fair.
We want
B.
on-site housing.
okay,
B, we want outside.
Yeah,
okay.
Okay, so now, should
just
we have
more of it.
a vote?
Hold on one
Lots of
second. Let me
exit.
just write this down. Option B. Wait, so this is gonna be super rough.
Option B, no swapping,
Net new,
no.
Net new, no double counting,
Still want 30%
No.
total square footage.
double counting,
happens around the same time,
30.
actually gets done.
Not Hudson.
tie
I would say
foundation.
before. Not at the same time.
Right, it doesn't lag.
Can you
I-
switch
I-
my vote from C to ineligible?
Yeah.
Oh, right, well, that was just
But it
a
was
straw
only a
poll.
straw,
That wasn't a
yeah.
real,
That's a straw poll?
yeah.
You wanna say net new instead of new?
Oh,
Oh,
it's,
sorry.
Yeah, we have to
Autocorrect.
wordsmith this anyway.
Yeah, this is just
we
so
just-
that we all
just-
know what we're
it's a
talking about.
notes apology. We just,
It says
sorry,
what?
that's a joke that,
I didn't get the joke, let's move on. I don't want it to be explained to me either. All right,
Is that, and wait, and lawyer and Extel to pay for
I
lawyer
mean,
firms?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
sure.
this is giving us indicator to what to negotiate with, so like,
So are
Yeah.
we hitting the AMI target?
oh, yeah, we didn't talk about
I
AMI.
think we shouldn't. I think that's like a
Yeah,
much later
I
conversation
agree.
personally.
I agree.
Okay, great, let's call the question,
So these are this is what we're voting for.
yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
1, 2.
Option B.
There's all this other stuff.
Yeah.
7,
It's everything
8,
together.
9, 10.
So
Well, you're
you're
ineligible.
Well, she said I'm not.
No, that was for the straw.
You are
No,
ineligible.
this is real now.
This one,
12.
you're ineligible.
We should
Oh,
go
this is
to
real.
the Zoom
Yeah.
to see.
Okay, Miranda says yes, but.
Yeah, so I think I have 12.
and
Okay.
Madge.
Madge?
Madge, are you voting on?
Madge is
Yeah.
not committee though, I think.
But I'm not on the committee.
Oh,
Sorry,
so,
I thought you
yeah.
were. okay.
Okay, now, any opposed? Any abstaining?
1 abstain,
1
ineligible, 1.
and 1. Okay. Motion
Great.
passes 12-0, 1, 1.
Exciting, we'll let everyone know how it progresses.
Could you just clarify that the lawyer would be of our choice?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Find a lawyer
we will-
from down.
We will take a draft at,
Yeah.
Yeah.
a shot at
Presumably the
drafting
lawyer
this.
We know
comes
who the
just to
lawyer
like,
is, huh?
at the very
But they
end.
may have more than one lawyer.
Yeah.
Right.
At the end of the day.
Q,
Yeah, everybody, first off, anyway, it's me up here, Quentin from Senator Botch's office. Didn't want to ask before the vote, didn't want to change it, but, has Xtel given any kind of indication for lots they view as, oh, this could be a good spot for some of the off-campus housing, or have they not gotten that far yet?
Nothing written. They've made some hand wavy comments about rights that they have somewhere in the district.
And they mentioned one property that went away, but was ideal.
Yes.
Yeah, 2 years ago, they mentioned, Dharma to the
Go for it.
Just to modify what I said about leverage, as I say, they say they're afraid of another lawsuit. I think they also are getting some pressure from city plan. So that Gail's, meeting next week will be very important. I think without, this whole thing started when we filed our application for a zoning change. And city planning has been involved.
Yeah.
They don't like our zoning change, but they would like to satisfy the community. And I think they may be putting some, even though they don't have a lot of leverage, they're
Right.
putting some pressure on, Xtel.
I think it has lots of different angles. I think it's wanting to do better, I think it's wanting to have a better relationship, as Adam was saying, because they're a frequent flyer. I think it's fear of DCP. I think it's, asking for other things in the future. So I think it's all of the above. So we gotta make hay while it's sunny.
And the last thing that city planning told us is that they would prefer us to come to a negotiated settlement. However, there are two things that they were interested in for a text amendment, which was bulk packing and street wall. So they've not, sent us a draft of what that text amendment would look like, but it's something that they said they wanted.
But also remember what Excel said about the bulk packing, is that if the bulk packing technically was done, then they wouldn't do any, it would reduce the economics so much that they wouldn't do any affordable.
Yeah, they said and I think it's the timing, right? It shuts down
Yeah.
everything. So the likelihood, I think, of city planning doing that, I don't know, but yeah.
Another thing I would suggest is that you propose to Xtel that they infuse some cash perhaps into some of the so-called zombie apartments that exist in the district. There are lots of them. I sit on the board of an organization called the Manhattan Valley Development Corporation, and we have at least a dozen and a half units that are off the market. They're either rent stabilized or rent controlled and need hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs
To bring them up to
to
code.
bring them up to code. And of course, the investment cannot be recouped in the rents that they would yield. So that's another suggestion. I'm not advocating for one particular organization or landlord to get that infusion of cash, but it's another thing that I think should be considered in the net new conversation.
We did at one point have a conversation about the idea of preservation of existing affordable housing. We just weren't quite sure how to make that happen.
Well, Amazon Houses has 40 vacancies, just so you know.
Yeah, I mean, all of the Nitro ones do actually as
Right.
well. I think there are 37 in the brownstones. And
Well, they're about to get renovated. That kind of makes sense.
All right, I think the last thing we wanted to highlight is,
there we go.
so this is the resolution, which we're not gonna vote on, which highlights, again, some of the work that Ethel and Shelley have been doing, speaking to people hyper local who live in this area. And I know some of you have some different thoughts on it, Richard, about things like, there's a lot of talk about like celebrating the artistic identity of Lincoln Center out in bigger parts, introducing walkability, cultural expression, public realm design. So I think this is what we heard from people who live in the immediate area. There's a definite focus they want on improving quality of life things. And so we'll be talking about that next meeting, about how with Ethel and Shelley, we can help Xtel see how to make the surrounding area also better.
I mean, I'd love Ethel and Shelley to present this to us. I just have concerns that we are asking for all the things.
Yeah, everything
And
big.
like, what's the trade-off here? And I think we are clear that affordable housing is our priority. So I'm just a little cautious about
Yeah,
adding on.
to me, I feel like this is good, but some of these things could wait if that makes sense,
On
so.
the other hand, some of it could be a win-win, so you have to.
I actually think they're amazing design principles, but like, do we want to force them to do this?
Right.
I didn't this would that as saying that Excel was gonna pay for this. Oh, that is saying this is what we want to have happen, and it wasn't clear to me who was gonna pay for it.
I think it's
The
Excel
assumption
and
is that
city
Some of the
agencies.
things on their block, yes,
Yeah.
but this goes way beyond.
But
their-
like, they're not
For
gonna raise
example, They wanna make
Yeah.
66th Street.
That's
like,
DOT.
Attach it to Lincoln Center somehow.
Well, like, there
It had nothing to do with Lincoln.
There are
Center.
definitely examples where private developers have paid to connect, to refurbish transport, MTA stations or give another elevator to this station.
In
So like,
exchange
it's,
For a bonus.
Right,
Yeah,
it's typically on
yeah.
their site.
yeah,
They're getting a bonus, Alex, already.
yeah. But anyway, Ethel and Shelley will come back and talk to us more about what they've learned from members of the immediate community. I do think it's important that we also keep in mind what they want, especially because they're the ones who live right around the building. So.
No, they don't. No, no.
Madge, go ahead.
No, they don't. Neither one of them lives anywhere near there. I live right
Oh, no.
opposite 30 West 67th Street. I
Oh, yeah,
want
I
to tell
mean-
you, there's no
I mean-
better there are no better subway stations in the neighborhood than the ones near us. They have plenty of signage. They have
Yeah.
the shortest walk out of the station practically anywhere. They're clean and very well run. So I don't know where some of this stuff comes from.
Okay, what I meant to say is not that Ethel and Shelley live near Lincoln Center, but that they have spent time meeting and breakfasting and going to the meetings of the people who live right around there, who have formed a 14 building group to discuss what should happen to the site. But yes, they both live,
I'm going to start going, but
yes.
I
But
think
this-
you should
we
invite
have a
those.
privileged subway
We
station.
do, yeah, we have them often at the construction advisory.
No, I mean.
Yeah, we'll
Here.
have them come.
Well, they've
Yeah.
come.
Yeah,
They
they've
came
come,
to the
yeah.
last.
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah.
They
A
spoke.
lot of there, I don't.
We'll invite again. All right, cool. Well, I turn it back over to you.
Okay, old business, new business.
Something just quickly that I think would interest the committee, call it new business or it's just for report. I'm on the preservation committee, as is Adam as well, and this month, we had 3 applications to turn brownstones, townhouses back into single-family houses. And I actually didn't try to do a complete count. We had the old floor plans of each floor of these buildings and then the new ones, but it was clear that however these buildings got vacated, and they may have been vacated before the current owners bought them. And the current owners, in one case, is a family. In the other 2 cases, I'm not sure if it's a developer who's doing it, making it single family and selling it to somebody, or whether it's family that's bought it and sells. But what was clear is all 3 of these brownstones were multi-family, multi-unit residences where, was it a total of 6 or 8 or 10 among all 3 buildings, but a whole lot of apartments somehow in the last few years got lost in the process of turning these 3, this month only, 3 of them into single.
Yeah, that's a long-term trend that we've
Yeah,
certainly
that's a
seen.
big thing in our
Yeah.
district. That's why
Oh, it is,
we
but
lose units
it was-
overall.
that's
We've lost
exactly
over
right.
100,000 in
Yeah.
population because of that, all the way through from the hundreds down to
Sure.
the 60s.
And I think I've always wondered,
who
where
did
do
that
these people
research?
go at half of a floor or
Where
a
do the people
floor?
who
Where are they
lived-
going?
Where do the people who lived in Lincoln Center go?
Well, yeah.
That's another question. It was 100,000 units, not 100,000 people. So it's even
People
more.
combining.
I was going by population, it was like down from 300 to 200.
Okay. I thought you were talking, my thesis research was on people combining apartments, so. Very, very familiar with this topic.
Like probably 3 meetings ago at the start of the year, I don't know, that was 2 meetings at the start of the year, there was like a list of priorities that the
Yeah.
committee had put together. Did that get finalized at some point, or does that get finalized at some point as to?
I mean, we have been looking at that for putting together agendas, but there was no like formal
Oh, but
vote.
that was, so it's not a formal thing, it was just sort of a.
It was just to try to organize us and to sort of raise topics of interest.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.